Hey, nature photographers, it's Lee Hoy again, and I've got a topic today that I have been contemplating and considering for quite some time. It's something I've wanted to share. I wasn't really sure in what format or what setting, and I know I'll be expanding upon this as well. But today's topic is going to be questions I wished my clients would ask. See, I lead photography workshops around the world. This year, I've already been in Yellowstone for a month. I've been in the Peruvian Amazon. I've been in Florida on a Mastering Birds in Flight. I've been in Cuba, Patagonia, Texas, Ohio. My travels have been extensive already, and I leave shortly for an event in Seattle and then off to a workshop in the Galapagos Islands. And so, I generally have anywhere from, 3 to 4 clients on the small side. And the only ones where I have a lot of clients tend to be the Amazon riverboat cruise and the Galapagos Islands, and it's still relatively small for the boats we have. So I'm out in the field all the time with clients, and over the years, I've come to expect usually certain traditional questions from clients. They get a little bit predictable at times, and understandably so. Today's topic is questions I wish my clients would ask. I'm going to share 5 with you, and I'm going to explain the importance of those questions. And a little tip, if you pay to go on a photography class, a photography workshop, it behooves you to ask lots of questions. 95% of my clients don't ask enough questions, and I know it's easy to get overwhelmed too when you're in the field, but I really want to encourage you to think about how much you can possibly learn when you're around someone who's been doing it for quite a while. Howdy from West Texas. I'm Lee Hoy, professional nature photographer, and this is my YouTube channel, Lee Hoy Photography. I'm an OM System Ambassador, photography workshop instructor for Wildside Nature Tours of Precision Camera and Video, and contributing author for the Journal of Wildlife Photography. All right, let's take question number 5. I'm going to go in reverse order of questions to my number 1 question. The other ones aren't really in so much of an order, but the first question is, so I'm going to cover it last. So here is the 5th question. Tell us what you see regarding the current light direction and quality of light in our setting that drives your photography decisions. Let me say that again. Tell us about the current light direction and light quality in our current setting and how that's going to affect your photography decisions. So whether I'm cruising along a tributary in the Amazon River, whether I am hiking along a cliff's edge in the Galapagos, whether I'm on a heavily overcast day in snow in Yellowstone, whether we're along a shoreline in Cuba, or even harder, a dappled light forest in Costa Rica, all of those settings are going to drive what I'm looking for differently. So the reason I think this question would be important to ask is because on many of our workshops, we're covering different lighting conditions, lighting scenarios, and obviously every day the light conditions and light quality changes as weather, heat, atmospheric conditions come into play, as shade comes into play or other objects. We have all kinds of things. And there's 2 aspects, to light that I kind of want to talk about in this. Light direction, we have frontal light that's hitting our subject directly in front of us. We have side light, which comes in many different forms. There's raking side light, there's heavy side light. There is direct overcast light, which is often poor for photography, but there are conditions where it can be good. And there's backlight, there's overcast light, there's flash or fill light. There's all kinds of light direction, okay? That's one aspect of light. But another aspect of light is light quality. And light quality can take many different forms. So this is, if you will, light quality is referring to a scale of crappy light to great light. And there's many different categories of each. It's not that, well, there's just one type of bad light. No, there's multiple types of bad light. But there are also ways to utilize conditions in bad light where you can still capture some good images at times. So one of the things I wish people would ask is, all right, when we're in a boat and we're in Brazil's Pantanal region, and we're looking for jaguars and birds. Well, oftentimes, as we're in these little boats that aren't that far off the water, And as you're going down a tributary, if it curves or it's windy or if it's straight, well, the light direction and the light quality is going to vary from shore to shore, depending on what direction the sun is, if it, what direction you're heading and what side the sun is on, or if it's in front of you, behind you. And one of the things I like to do is I like to read that light direction and quality, and then I'm going to focus on a part of the river where I would like to take a picture. And this is a different mindset than a lot of photographers that simply look for a subject anywhere and then they're going to try to respond. The problem is, if you're looking in the real shady side of the bank and you've got your settings set for the sunny side, you're going to be fiddle-farting around with settings and you miss a lot more images than you're probably going to capture. The whole spray and pray method of wildlife photography, as opposed to be very intentional about where I want to capture images. And so when I'm going down the river, I'm fine if I miss shots of something because it's not in a light direction or light quality that would produce a visually compelling image. I'm completely okay with that. Now, obviously in overcast settings, I can probably shoot in more directions without that kind of a problem. But that's what I would like to share more, is when we're out in the field, regardless of the habitat type, regardless of the time of day, I would love to talk more about light direction and light quality, because there's macro and micro scales to this. There's what's happening for the whole day in a big area. In other words, it's a very heavy overcast sky, or there's no clouds and it's very bright sun. But then there's also micro areas. Hey, look at this dapple light. One of my favorite types of light is what I call emerging light. And it's really more about a subject emerging into the light from the shadows. I'll show you. Here's an image of what that would look like. And so, the more you understand light, direction, quality, and how you can look for it, you also set yourself up for success. And rather than trying to just fight light, which so many photographers do, and they actually make it very frustrating on themselves because they're constantly needing to modify their settings, or they're stressing, what I call FOMO. We all hear about that, fear of missing out. I don't have a FOMO. Now, I have FOMO if I'm set up to photograph something in specific light. If a subject comes into that light and I screw up, then I get upset with myself because I should have been better prepared. That's different. But I'm perfectly content missing shots, knowing when not to press the shutter button because light direction, light quality sucks. And it's like I like to say, just because an image is sharp and properly exposed doesn't mean it doesn't suck. So let's start asking these kind of questions of your workshop leader, your class instructor, and then start asking it of yourself when you are out, whether it be your neighborhood park, a local wildlife refuge, maybe you live near a national park or a beach. And the more you learn and think about these very conditions, the better your photography will be. All right, question number 4 that I wish clients would ask me is not this standard question I get all the time. What processing software do you use? In many ways, that's irrelevant. Obviously, what software you use is important as long as you master it. Ironically enough, I use Lightroom, but I will tell you that Capture One handles OM system raw files better than Lightroom. But Capture One completely lacks any organizational ability. And because of DxO Pure Raw software, which is now version 4, I don't worry about that slight difference that Capture One offered over Lightroom, because after I get done with DxO Pure Raw, it's irrelevant. It takes care of that now, okay? So the question isn't what software do I use? The more important question would be, what are some of the most important elements of post-processing, regardless of the software you use? Again, let me say that again. What are some of the most important elements of post-processing? Okay. For example, some of the things I see, particularly with beginning and amateur photographers, is overusing saturation, way too much. Extreme over sharpening. And, we all have different preferences of what we like, so that does need to come into play as well. Some of the other important elements are masking, local adjustments versus global adjustments, When do we want to make an adjustment to just one part of our image versus an adjustment to the entire image? A lot of people don't understand those differences, right? Understanding the difference between, like in Lightroom, if you use Lightroom, learning how to understand the difference between clarity and texture. What do? Initially they appear similar, but they have very different effects on your image. So as we get into post-processing, Jeff Shuey wrote a book, Schewe maybe. Jeff, I apologize if you ever were to see this video. I probably butchered the spelling of your last name. But he wrote a book about Lightroom that was different than all the other books. Most of the other books are recipes, and I'm not picking on anybody. There's some great photographers, and there's some well-known photographers that write books about Lightroom, but they're often like recipe books. Like sometimes you read a recipe, well, okay, I add this much spice, but why? Most time people don't tell you, well, if you add cumin, it's gonna counter with this and give you this kind of a flavor. Recipe books don't generally talk about that. They just tell you, like if you were teaching a chimp how to make something, that's how I learned to cook, to be honest. I make some good dishes, but I'm pretty much a chimp. I just repeat what someone else has done well. When it comes to post-processing, learning the whys, not just the hows, like books that say, push, if you want to increase clarity, slide it to the right. Well, no crap, Sherlock. My God, I could not have figured that out in a million years of my own. What I want to know is why and when would I slide the clarity slider. And Jeff had a great book. It's a little more dated now, but still what he describes in there is still excellent. And we need to understand the important elements of editing and post-processing our images, and a lot of that is going to translate regardless of the software you use. Okay, when do you clone out just a little something? Do you have a real bright reflection off a stone on a beach? And if so, what's the best technique for cloning that out and making sure that your image looks good? Okay, those are some of the more important questions. Not which software do you use, and then everybody goes, okay, let me go get that. But how is the best way to post-process different types of images? I mean, the way you post-process a wildlife image versus a macro image versus a landscape image and a night sky image, those are all very different. And understanding how to go about that process. So I think that would be a better question to ask. So that was question number 4. So question number 3 that I'd love to hear from my clients is, what is it about the current scene or subject that you are shooting that you feel makes it a visually compelling image? Now, y'all hear me use this phrase a lot, visually compelling image, and at some point I'll do a video on what is a visually compelling image, but it's something that goes beyond something that's just properly exposed, right? It goes beyond something that's sharp. Again, just because those two elements, those are the bare minimum of an image. It's like, that's just the basic foundation. Nobody gets impressed when you show them, hey, look, you want to go see the new home I'm building, and you pull up and all there is a foundation. It's very important. It's very critical to the building of that home, but it doesn't wow, okay? That's not a wow factor. So I wish they would more often ask me what I'm looking at, whether it be macro, landscape, night sky. Why did I set up the way I'm set up? Why am I at the angle that I'm at? Why am I at the elevation I'm at? What am I framing? Why am I framing it that way? What lighting conditions are appealing to me? What am I hoping occurs if we're dealing with wildlife? Why am I so patient in this particular case? What is it I'm hoping may occur? What behavior from my subject might I be looking for? What is it that I'm thinking I'm going to capture? And a lot of times people are just very reactive to subjects. Sometimes I see, particularly like you're in macro, I see a beautiful caterpillar or beetle or whatever, and I may not even photograph it because the setting it's in is just not going to make a visually compelling image. And to be honest, there are some things I will pick up, maybe relocate, but if I'm in a let's say a tropical climate, and I see a fuzzy looking caterpillar, this boy's not stupid enough to grab a fuzzy looking caterpillar that he does not know what species it is and what impact it might have on you when you pick it up. So oftentimes I see a beautiful subject, but it's not in good light. It's not going to have a good background. What is it about the current scene, if we're talking landscape photography and even wildlife sometimes? or the setting that makes me feel that it's going to produce a visually compelling image? And those are great questions to ask yourself. You know, just because you have an amazing subject doesn't mean the image isn't going to suck, right? I mean, sometimes the lighting, the background, the habitat around it or whatever, it's just not going to lead to a good image. So keep that in mind when you're out in the field. All right, the second question that I wish my clients would ask, I get the first part of this all the time. This is what I hear all the time. What are your settings? Okay? But so often they don't ask what focal length are you at, because that can and may make a difference. They don't ask what are you hoping to accomplish in this image. Like, okay, here's my shutter speed. Well, is it to stop action? Do I want to blur something? What is my ISO, right? It's just what are your settings, and they'll often replicate it, which I'm not saying that's always bad. You can still learn from that. But I think the better question would be, why have you chosen the settings that you're currently using? So instead of what are your settings, why have you chosen the settings that you're using? You see the difference there? One is just to replicate, the other is to try to understand. And again, I'm not saying that the first question is necessarily a bad one, but I don't think it starts to dive deep into the why. And so often the what is important, but the why and the how can be even more. So as you're thinking about those concepts, I want to behoove you to contemplate not what should my settings be. You know, I hear from a lot of very new photographers, they'll get their camera and they walk out, we're staying on the beach, we're going to do bird and flight. Well, what should my settings be? Well, that depends. Are we shooting a pale gull against a dark background? Are we shooting a cormorant against a bright background? Are we shooting on an overcast day? I mean, I know people wish there was one setting they could just set and always be done, but that eliminates the creative aspect of photography completely. So I want you to start thinking when you're shooting, whether you're by yourself or maybe you're in a class, ask that question instead of what are your settings. So why have you chosen the settings that you're currently using? And that is a completely different twist on what you're doing in the field. All right, so I spent a lot of time thinking, reflecting, contemplating. I mean, it's just how I'm wired. I have like 9 channels that run all the time, and one of them I can never share because it has absolutely no filter. And I've been a little more moderate in today's video. I've been on the road a lot, and I apologize too for not being able to get to comments. I try to stay on top of comments, but between going from Cuba straight to Patagonia, straight to Ohio, basically, it's been really hard to keep up, and I hope you're enjoying the videos, but just know if I haven't answered or replied to your comment, it's because A, sometimes I don't see it, and B, I've just been very limited on time. But without further ado, this is the question that I wish clients would ask me in the field more than anything, okay? More than anything, because I think they could learn a lot from it, and it's probably going to surprise you. Here we go. If we weren't with you, what would you be shooting here and why? So let me say that again. If we weren't with you, what would you be shooting here and why? Let me explain why I think that'd be a great question. Sometimes when you're with a group, you are constrained either by their abilities, by safety, by, not necessarily wanting to get people muddy and dirty that don't want to be. Maybe it's because you can't get a group to the spot where you would shoot. But what I think that would teach them is how to begin to look for similar opportunities for themselves. Okay? So while I might not be able to get a group of 4 photographers in there, or they may not want to lay down in the mud at that time, it'll begin to open their eyes. Because quite often when I'm with a group versus when I'm by myself, I'm much more willing to put myself on the edge of a cliff for a shot than if I've got, 8 people and 6 of them are over 70. I'm much more willing to endure brutal winds with very cold temps than most people are. I'm much more willing to lay on cactus or near cactus. I mean, I live in the desert. I've still got spots on my skin from thorns from a long time ago, right? I'm much more willing to do and crawl. Sometimes you can't get a whole group to crawl efficiently and carry their camera. But I think what it would do is begin to educate them on how to look for similar opportunities. Like maybe they couldn't crawl and get real low, but maybe they can kneel down. And I still do a lot of that at times in the field, and they can choose to replicate or not. But I think asking the question, if we weren't with you, for example, like maybe I can only get the group here, but I could say, well, if I were by myself and it was, acceptable to get to this location, that's where I'd be shooting. Well, how come we're not there? Well, it's not safe to get over there with a group, or I'm not going to make you walk that far, or, sometimes people just don't, some people just can't do certain things, whether it be physically. Some people kind of get where mentally it's a little too much for them. I tend to go when I'm photographing and wear myself out because that's just how I'm wired. But I think you could learn to see, okay, interesting, so that you might not be able to go do that very thing by yourself, but you could look for similar opportunities when you're out on photographic endeavors, whether in a group or on your own. So I might say, well, I would go over here, like sometimes on a boat, say we got a Jaguar in the Pantanal, a lot of people want to shoot front light because it's a little easier to expose. You can get that warm light at times, but sometimes it lacks some dimension, where I might prefer a backlit shot to have a much more dramatic, visually compelling image. So there are times I'd say, well, if it were just me, like, maybe there are these other boats weren't here, I'd be a little over here. I'd move left 30 feet for this angle because then this branch or that branch wouldn't be there. I think the more we can think about that, learning from a professional photographer and what they do on their own is very different oftentimes of what we can do when we're with a group. And it just might help instruct you on fieldcraft, which is how you go about approaching a subject or assessing a scene, whether it be landscape photography, macro. Like if we're in Panama, and I'm doing a night macro walk, well, I'm probably going to stick to trails. But if I were by myself and it were okay to do so, I might get off the trail, but I'm probably not doing that with a group. So many people are just afraid to be out at night in the jungle as it is. But, there's obviously more risks and uncertainties that come with doing that. I might say, well, I'd be laying down here. In fact, in the Amazon this year, in the Peruvian Amazon, I had a nice crested forest toad. I'll show you the image right here. And, everybody started, we saw it, and people were just, the first thing they do is they start shooting. They don't think about the background. They don't think about the light. They don't think about the setting. So once everybody got done with the clickety-click, I found a beautiful leaf. I relocated the toad to that leaf, and I laid down. Of course, lots of people, oh, Lee, there's ants. And yeah, I know. In fact, I actually ran my leg into a palm tree that has spines down there. There was a dead piece of the branch, and some of the spines broke off in my leg. And I still got one little spot from a month ago, but I don't care. I got a nice eye-level shot. So a lot of the things we're willing to do are above and beyond what many other photographers might do, but that's okay. You can still learn from it. Like you might say, oh, well, I may not lay down on the ground for whatever reason, but I have a flip screen on the back of my camera. I could rest my camera on the ground, flip my screen out, and work to get the same shot. So you don't always have to do the exact same thing. But that is the question I would wish I could get asked the most is, if we weren't with you, what would you be photographing right now? So those are some of the questions that have come about from years of experience guiding, leading, photographing, watching, observing. Those are just a few of them. I have others, and I'm sure I'll share some more in the future. Just FYI, I am increasing the number of OM system only workshops I'll be offering. So be sure and check out the Wildside Nature Tours website. That's Wildside Nature Tours website. You can hop over there and click on my name under our team. You can see all my workshops. I've got some great destinations coming up this year. Grand Teton in winter. I'm going with another OM System ambassador to Panama in November to do a macro workshop. And I've got some really good opportunities. I've got Mastering Bird and Flight Photography in Florida next March. That's only 3 OM System photographers. So if you really want to take your photography to another level and you shoot OM System, hop on some of those OM only ones. Now I have other workshops where it's mixed photographers, so I still do plenty of those. Hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful. We'll see you next time.